Hello, welcome to Adapt State of the Canopy. I'm Jessica Palombo, I'm your host this evening, and I am so happy to have you here in the studio. It's always humbling to see so many faces in the room here who have decided to spend your evening with us when you can be anywhere else. So I think we're going to have a great conversation here focused on trees in Jacksonville. And if you don't know who I am, I'm the editor of Jacksonville Today, and thank you. Thank you. Subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already at jaxtoday.org. It's a free daily morning newsletter, a 5-minute read of everything you need to know about Jacksonville and the surrounding areas, and Adapt is part of that. We have these conversations about once a year. We have for the past few years here in our studio with officials from the city of Jacksonville. This year is a little bit different. Greenscape approached us about partnering on this event, and I thought the tree canopy and the changing of the tree canopy and what people can do about it was an important topic, and I said, let's do it. So before we get started with the conversation, Greenscape has provided a little viewing for us.
Trees do more than just beautify our neighborhoods. They protect our environment, our health, and our future. Urban trees are vital habitats for wildlife, providing food and shelter in the heart of our city. Spending time in green spaces supports mental health, lowering stress, improving focus, and even boosting happiness. Trees clean our air by absorbing pollutants and capturing carbon that contributes to climate change. And when storms hit, trees act like natural pumps, absorbing water and reducing the risk of flooding.
Trees are natural pumps. There is no device made by man or created by nature more effective on pulling water from saturated soil than a tree.
On hot days, shade from trees can make it up to 30 degrees cooler than full sun. That cooling power helps reduce energy bills and the threat of heat-related illness. City streets, rooftops, and parking lots trap heat, making some neighborhoods dangerously hot, even overnight. In North Florida, we're already feeling the impact. Our region has lost nearly 4% of its tree canopy in just the last decade due to storms, development, and neglect. Jacksonville is now facing real public health threats from extreme heat. Some zip codes are especially vulnerable.
Heat is actually the #1 weather-related cause of death. We tend not to think about it because it's kind of a silent killer, right? It's not like this dramatic thing that happens. It's just that the heat builds up over time, and people need to be aware of when it's really hot and how to protect themselves.
But we can change this. You can help protect and grow our urban forest. Thank you for joining us today. The solutions and strategies we form today will help shape the future of our city's canopy. Together, we can protect the trees that protect us. This message is brought to you by Greenscape of Jacksonville with support from the USDA and the Florida Forest Service.
All right, inspiring, woo, yes. So I would like to introduce our panel now and just acknowledge that originally St. Johns County Commissioner Clay Murphy was scheduled to be part of this panel, and he had a last-minute schedule conflict and sends his regrets. So we will have a Duval-focused conversation tonight. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jenny Hinton. She is with the City of Jacksonville's Resilience Office. She's a Deputy Chief Resilience Officer and Project Manager for the city's new Urban Forestry Management Plan initiative, which we will hear about a little later. Hi, Jenny. We also have Billy Burke, Vice Chair of the City of Jacksonville's Tree Commission and a landscape architect with the firm HDR, which has designed most of our city's parks. Hi, Billy. And Lisa Grubba, who is Executive Director of Greenscape. They're a nonprofit that works with the city and advocates for protecting trees. Hi, Lisa. Let's start with you. So we just heard in that video that a Florida Forest Service report, that was a statewide report that came out a couple years ago, showed roughly a 4% reduction in tree cover for our northeast part of the state. So, and that was about over an 8-year period ending in 2021 specifically. So what can you tell us, Lisa, about how does Northeast Florida, our region, compare in its tree cover to the rest of the state?
So first of all, I want to say that for those of you who don't know, that Greenscape of Jacksonville is a nonprofit tree advocacy group, and some people wonder what's a tree advocacy group, and we are the link between the public and the city officials and the other stakeholders in the urban forest here. And so we've been here for 50 years. We're the oldest in the state of Florida. We're the second oldest in the country. And we started out by planting trees and then added in advocacy over the years, working with our city officials on best practices and policies. So when this Florida Forest Service study came out, we were very interested in the results. We didn't have a study like that before. While Northeast Florida has lost 4%, there are parts of Florida that have lost even more to development. And I think if you're in Florida, you already know that. And also to storms. Overall, Jacksonville and Duval County has a pretty decent cover, canopy cover, somewhere around 50%, depending on what study you're looking at. There are cities in the country that their goal is to get to 30%. That's considered a good goal in a city, is to get to 30% coverage. We're at 50 roughly, but we are seeing that decline coming from development and from storms. And so, what do we need to do about it? That's what we're here to talk about tonight.
And just going off of that, and I could address this to all of our panelists, if you could speak a little bit more about what is specifically causing most of the loss here in Jacksonville of the trees.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Lisa touched on it. It's development. I mean, it's largely development, which, is a good thing economically, not so great for the tree canopy. So I'll say also, kind of piggybacking on some of the stuff that Lisa said, that Florida Forest Service study, it came out in 2023, but the data stopped in 2021. So it's probably more than 4% now would be my guess. And interestingly, it did focus in on urban areas. So statewide, the average urban tree canopy for the urbanized areas in Florida is 36%. Jacksonville is about 30%. So a little bit more room to grow, but kind of the encouraging part of that study is it's pretty ambitious, but it says that we could get up to 71% in those urban areas. Everywhere is different. Not every urban area or neighborhood is going to get to 71% canopy cover, but it just goes to show you there's room to do more.
What that study showed specifically in the Jacksonville area, I did read that section of the report, and it said over the 8 years, the loss in Jacksonville was nearly 19,000 acres over those 8 years. Jenny, how much of a cause for alarm is 19,000 acres of trees gone for the city's Office of Resilience?
Yeah, so just to put that into context, an acre is approximately a football field without the end zones. So that's a large amount of acreage. Our preserved parks and our parks across Jacksonville are roughly 20,000 acres of city-owned parkland. So I would say that's a pretty substantial loss that we're facing, and one that needs to be addressed, especially when you consider the adverse impacts of not having a tree canopy. And I think we're going to talk about that next, urban heat island effect.
We certainly are, Jenny. So extreme heat is an issue that we are all increasingly contending with as a planet. Here in Jacksonville, what does that look like, and what does that have to do with trees?
Yeah, so the image that you're showing here is taken from the Resilient Jacksonville strategy. For those of you that aren't familiar, I encourage you to check it out. It's on our website. This was a study that was done back in 2022, but it's still relevant today. There were volunteers that drove all over Jacksonville, and they collected almost 140,000 measurements across the city over the course of a day, driving predetermined routes. And then we used that data and extrapolated it to determine what the heat impact is across our city. And these are evening temperatures, and they start at, I think it's a little too small for you guys to read, 95 degrees. So at 7 o'clock in the evening, we were still experiencing heat at 95 degrees on this date, which, as we all know, can cause physiological damage to people with pre-existing conditions and just make it generally hard to get out in your garden or to be outside and do what you need to do. The warmer areas are well in excess of 115 degrees, and you can see that those are concentrated around our areas where we have commercial development or a lot of impervious surface, like our airport. And the cooler areas are those that are highly vegetated. And so I think that this really tells the story of how important our tree canopy is for reducing heat and how different parts of our community can be affected by heat.
Can I jump in?
Please.
We know that in the shade, temperatures can be up to 30 degrees cooler than in an area that has no shade. And despite what I said earlier about our area having overall around a 50% canopy coverage, that is not evenly distributed throughout Duval County. So we have some parts of town, especially the more urban parts of town, that have no shade at all. Due to urban infill. And one thing that we see, personally, we have prioritized planting in low-income neighborhoods, and so we're in those neighborhoods that don't have trees. And so as we're working in parks there, we see the members of the public walking to the bus stop to go to work, or taking their bike, or walking to work, or coming from the bus stop with their bags of groceries. They're not getting in an air-conditioned car and driving around town. They're out walking. And in an area with no canopy coverage, also when we've had extreme heat, like we've had in this country in the last 10 years, the pavement, the roofs, the buildings absorb heat, and then they don't cool down at night during the hottest of days. And in some parts of town, the air conditioning can't keep up with cooling down the buildings. And so then when people don't cool down overnight, that's where you get into a public health crisis. That's where then, people die. And we've already seen in the last few years, the mayor sending out cooling stations. They've sent out JTA buses around town so that people can get in the bus and in the air conditioning and cool down. So that's where that public health threat comes in. So we are seeing it in our low-income neighborhoods in town, but also we've gotten calls from Duval County Public Schools that they are experiencing in all parts of town, the kids overheating on the sport fields and the playgrounds. And so there is an effort underway to plant trees there also.
Jenny, what are we looking at here as it relates to extreme heat in our city?
Yes, so as part of the Resilient Jacksonville strategy, the city did a consequence analysis to see what would happen if between now and 2070 we didn't change our development patterns. We're experiencing increased heat. We know that the trends are shifting in that direction. We're going to have more extreme heat during the day as well as during the evening. So we're going to see many more people that are adversely affected and vulnerable to heat than we do now. But that's why we came up with the Jacksonville Resilience Strategy. We're looking for actions that can be taken. That's why we're working on the Urban Forest Management Plan. We're trying to be proactive and say, what can we do to help lessen that risk?
Okay, we'll get back to that in just a moment. If you have a question for our panel, please raise your hand and my colleague will come around and collect those. Pass them to the ends of your aisle, and we will get to those at the end of the program. Okay. Billy, You serve on the Volunteer Tree Commission for the city of Jacksonville. That is a volunteer body. It's made up of 5 members, right? It includes a city council member, Raul Arias, who is
Correct.
the liaison to the Tree Commission. And can you give us just a little history of when this was created, why it was created?
Yeah, raise a hand of who has heard of the Jacksonville Tree Commission. Okay, well, that's
This
good.
crowd knows.
Yeah, with this crowd, that's probably to be expected. So for those who haven't heard of it, it was started in 2017 largely in response to an excessive amount of funds being placed in an escrow account, because when developers develop a piece of property, we have a landscape code, and if they cut down a tree, they have to replace a certain number of inches to replace that tree. If they can't do that by planting trees on the parcel that they're developing, they have to pay into a fund. So before the Tree Commission, to allocate those funds had to be a city council ordinance. They had to literally go and pass a bill, 3 readings. Finally, they could allocate funds to put money toward planting trees on a public property. It got very cumbersome, and as we've noted, the amount of development that's going on in Duval County, that tree fund started to grow exponentially, and they figured there had to be a better way to spend this money. And there was a legal action, and that resulted in the Tree Commission, 2017. So largely, we have, as a group, a lot of kind of directives. The main one is to how to spend that money. Some of the challenges that we have is they can only be planted on public property. So think public buildings, road rights of way, schools, parks, and so we can't plant it on private property. And then also a constraint is it has to be the right tree for the right place, and you've probably all heard that before. So if it's in a road right of way, for example, if there's an overhead power line, you're limited on what you can plant. If there's an underground utility, be it water, sewer, fiber, or whatever, you're limited on what you can plant. There's safety setbacks from the road, so there's all kinds of different, never mind the climatic conditions of a particular parcel, it's all the utilities and kind of urbanized restrictions that we have. That being said, I'm going to rattle off a few more statistics. I like statistics. So since the Tree Commission was started in 2017, it has allocated over $50 million to plant trees in the city, in just Duval County. That includes 18,000 that have either been planted or are currently approved to be planted, and about 10,000 of those 18,000 are medium or large canopy trees, and that's what we're talking about here is the canopy. How can we get more shade out there?
Okay. Lisa, back to you. Switching to the topic of urban forestry, can you just sort of define what that means? Who are the players here in Jacksonville when it comes to urban forestry?
Okay. An urban forest is basically a forest within a city, and it's distinct from a forest that's in a natural area like Jennings State Forest or Cary State Forest, Timaquan Preserve, because there are different stressors on the trees. So if you think about it, even though we have all these beautiful live oaks everywhere that are 100, 200, 300 years old, I don't even know how old the treaty oak is, we are constantly putting in roadways, expanding the roadways, putting in sidewalks, putting in fiber optic, running electrical lines, all things that the public has wanted. But those things, every time you go and cut into the root system of those trees, which can be at least, as far as the canopy, if not farther, every time you're cutting into that root system, you're potentially shortening the life of that tree. And so it's a different type of management of trees than it is in, say, Jennings State Forest. So the players are obviously the city. And in our case, that's the Public Works Department that plants trees, the Parks Department plants trees, and then we have the Planning Permitting Department. They're involved also. We have elected officials and the tree commissioners. We have the utility company, which is JEA, and in fact, there is a subfield of urban forestry called utility arboriculture. It is a specialty. And so JEA has 8 foresters on staff that manage the trees along the right-of-way where their utility lines are.
And that means minimizing harm to those trees when they're doing
Right.
what they need to do.
Right. And the advocacy group, and the schools and the advocacy groups. And so there's no city anywhere in the country that can manage its urban forest by itself. It takes all of those groups doing their part, knowing their role and doing their part to achieve a healthy urban forest.
Okay, so that brings us to Jenny. The city of Jacksonville is working on its first ever urban forestry management plan. What does that entail?
Yes, so we're really excited that the Office of Resilience has spearheaded this effort. It has been recommended by many other groups throughout the years that the city develop this urban forestry management plan or an urban forest master plan that would guide the direction of urban forestry throughout Jacksonville. So help setting a clear vision and goals for the city's urban forestry program, helping to make the program more coordinated and efficient, and then making sure that our urban forests have the adaptive capacity to withstand climate change and upcoming storm events, that they're wind resistant, that they're drought resistant. And so we're looking at all of these things and we're trying to come up with best practices that can help us to improve it here in Jacksonville.
In Jacksonville, we are a huge city, right? Encompassing the whole county, basically. So what does that mean for our plan? How does that make it different than other cities' plans?
Yeah, so Jacksonville has about 750 square miles of just land area. It is the largest in the contiguous United States by land area. And that really shapes how we approach most resilience issues, but certainly how we approach urban forestry. Many smaller municipalities are able to develop an urban forest management plan that speaks to every individual tree. They have every tree inventoried, they know where it is, what condition it's in, when it needs to be pruned next, and how big they've got all these details that there's no way that we're going to be able to get for a city the size of Jacksonville. But that doesn't mean that we can't strive to get sufficient information to make rigorous decisions. And so we're working on getting a canopy assessment for the city done at a very granular level and doing a change analysis to help us understand patterns of loss and gain to guide urban forestry management practices and policies.
The city has a tool that regular people can use to see what the city has been planting, right? That's something that you can go online and see and track the trees.
Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. It's called Tree Plotter. It's software that the city purchased. And if you go on to it's the urban forestry page, City of Jacksonville Urban Forestry. There's some buttons at the bottom, and one of them says Tree Plotter, and you can click on that, and you can click on a variety of factors to see what trees are being planted, where they're being planted, what's the species, that kind of thing.
It gets really specific street level, tree levels, yes.
You can spend a lot of time in there.
Lisa, what is Greenscape's role in all of this in the urban forestry management plan creation?
So about 4 years ago, the Tree Commission decided to do some strategic planning, and so they asked all the stakeholder groups in town to come and make recommendations. And after talking to some of our industry liaisons, Greenscape decided to advocate for this urban forest plan. So we really weren't talking about that in the city at that point, and it was something that we decided, a city as big and complex as Jacksonville, with the trends that we were seeing, it was time to have that professional level plan. So that is the point that we began to advocate about 4 years ago for, and I'm really happy to say I think that's kind of been our biggest advocacy win in the few years that I've been at Greenscape, because now that plan is funded. It's funded out of the Resilience Office, and that means they've hired a national urban forestry organization called Davy Research. They do these plans all over the country. And so it's a pretty standardized plan. There's certain things that they will provide, but by working all over the country, they then have the perspective of what is being done or not done in other cities, and that is a real great benefit to us. So that plan is underway, and I think will be done late summer or September of next year. And so we're really, really excited to see what comes out of that.
Jessica, can I chime in on that?
Please.
So from a tree commission perspective too, is this is kind of going to serve as our guide, our data-driven guide on where to prioritize tree plantings as well. So from that perspective, I'm excited about it because it will give us data in order to say where's the biggest bang for our buck, where can we put trees, today that will really make a difference, and prioritize them that way.
Yeah, if I may, I think that's one of the really interesting things that's going to come out of the canopy analysis that we'll be doing as part of the urban forest management plan. The Florida Forest Service report that came out in 2023 did an amazing job at looking at the canopy cover, but it only went down to the census block level. So we're going to be able to get much more granular information to identify those potential planting areas that are currently vegetated and could be forested, but are not currently.
Billy, what are the challenges that the Tree Commission faces?
Staffing. That's something we're addressing. So, it's been a criticism, and I'm sure a lot of people in here have heard that there's a lot of money in the tree fund. Somewhere in the mid 20 millions in the tree fund. Even though we spent 50 million over the last, since 2017, it's keeping up with the amount of money that's coming in. So the people currently, there's several different ways to allocate money to the tree fund. Two of them everyone in this room can do. There's one called Remove and Replace, and then another one called 630 City. I think you get to them both the same way, 630 City, either online or you call. And if you have a dead tree in the right-of-way or publicly owned property by your house, and it's dead and you want it replaced, the city will come out, remove it, put a new tree there, appropriate tree for the appropriate place. If it wasn't an appropriate tree initially, they'll put one that's more appropriate for that area. The other one is 630 City. If you currently have right-of-way in front of your home and you would like a tree there, the city will come out, do a site analysis, and figure out what tree would be appropriate to put there. So that's, anyone in this room can do that. Then there's two more programs called Level 2 and Level 3. Level 2, we do a lot of park projects where the city staff goes and will infill parks with shade trees. Say there's a playground and people in the neighborhood have been complaining about shade. We want shade. Okay, well, let's plant trees and shade the playground. The third one's a Level 3, and that's like a really, really big project, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's a lot of application process to go through that. But in all cases, especially with a Level 2 and Level 3, it's finding people who have the time to bring these plans before the commission for us to approve them. Everyone that does it with the city has a day job. It's not their job to do tree fund designs. So we are currently working on adding additional staff to the city for that purpose. That would be their primary purpose in that job, is to identify additional places to put trees, bring them before us so we can spend that money quicker.
All right. We are now going to start taking some of these audience questions. Thank you for all of this. This is the most questions we have ever gotten on any topic in this room, so round of applause for you guys. All right. The $50 million to grow trees only resulted because developers cut down trees in the first place. What can we do to stop developers from cutting down trees in the first place? And I think this same question is echoed throughout this stack.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I've always thought, and I've only been on this tree commission now, in November it'll be 2 years, and part of our charge is to make recommendations for the zoning code and the land development procedures manual that these developers use when they develop properties, is how do we incentivize saving existing trees over cutting them and planting new ones and paying into the fund. That's a hard topic. That's a very hard topic. But that's, I think, something on the Tree Commission that we should explore is how do we incentivize, because when you cut down a tree with a 50-foot, 100-foot canopy, and you put back a 2-inch caliper, 10-foot height tree with a 4-foot canopy, it's literally going to take a lifetime to achieve what that tree that you removed was achieving as far as climatic relief goes. So that's my challenge. It's more of a carrot than a stick approach, but I think, now it's very easy as a developer to remove trees, plant what you can on the site, pay into the fund, and move on. And that's why we have a huge fund, and that's why we're losing canopy.
And that's been a really important question to Greenscape, too. Our advocacy committee has really been discussing that. And in fact, we've reached out to the North Florida Builders Association to start a conversation so that we can start to understand what their issues might be, whether it's just a financial situation or whether it's regulation that's forcing them to clear a property in a certain way. So we are starting that conversation too. That's a great question.
And I'm going to kind of piggyback on her because it's what's going to make this even more difficult is there are new, as you develop property, everyone's got a stormwater pond. If you develop a subdivision or a commercial property, you have to deal with your stormwater. The stormwater rules in Florida are going to get more intense. It's going to be either you're going to have to do a larger pond or figure out how to better treat that water before it exits the pond. So if it wasn't hard enough to set aside more space on your lot or on your commercial property to save a tree, now you're going to be further squeezed by the stormwater rule. So it's introducing, a incentive to use more space to save trees while they have to deal with that is going to be a tall order.
Anything to add, Jenny, from the city's perspective?
Yes, I'll just add that as part of this urban forest management plan, we are looking at existing policies and policy recommendations, and specifically incentives for preservation of trees on existing lots.
This question comes from Janora in Riverside. What is done to maintain trees that are already planted by the city? What does that look like, maintaining these trees that are planted?
I'll say currently it's fairly reactive, that we have fairly limited staff in a very large city, and a lot of the maintenance is done in response to a call to 630 City and someone saying there's a branch or a tree that needs to be dealt with. But we are looking at proactive measures as part of this urban forest management plan and benchmarking against other cities and what their programs are doing and how they're staffing their programs to meet that level of service that's necessary. And one of the things that we're discussing internally is how do we start, right? You can't go from reactive maintenance all the way to proactive maintenance all at once. So we have planted 18,000 trees over the last 8 years. And so starting with those, young trees need pruning. And so making sure that we're starting with those trees and getting that right, and then hopefully building from there.
I'll say also, so Tree Commission, when they fund a project, they're, depending on where it is, there's either a 1 or 2 year like maintenance and guarantee on the tree. So initially to get it going right. But the other thing is, I've said it before on this panel, is right tree, right place. So if you do the right, if you plant a live oak under a power line, you're constantly fighting and cutting that live oak to make sure you're not interfering with the power line. Same thing if you plant a tree close to a building. So, if you put the right tree in the right place, over time it's going to minimize, not eliminate, but minimize those maintenance requirements.
And I would add to that, just briefly, that something that JEA achieved in recent years is they were able to get the trees that are under their care on a pruning cycle. And I think it's a 3-year cycle. And so every 3 years, they have hit every single one of their, or over a 3-year period, they have hit every single one of their trees. And the city has not been able to do that yet, get on that pruning cycle, just simply because of staffing need and the size of the city. On a smaller scale, with the volunteer-based tree plantings that we have done, we were able to get some funding from the Florida Forest Service to start a group called Tree Keepers. And so we are going out just this year back to our tree plantings, and we are doing structural pruning on those trees. And those trees are still young. They're at, standing 6, 8 feet tall. But by removing structural problems early, then we're avoiding problems in 20, 30 years. So we were really excited to get that program going this year.
When it comes to what trees you plant, are native species valued over others? How do you decide?
I'll always advocate for native trees. I think that they offer a wide range of benefits. Our wildlife, especially our pollinators, are very acclimated to the plants that they've evolved with, and so it's important to have natives in our environment. I think it's also very important that we have a diverse array of plants, and so that may be challenging because native plants can be hard to source, and so sometimes it's not possible to come up with a planting scheme that's purely native, and it's more important to find the right tree for the right place and look at its characteristics than it is necessarily to go native. But if a native is an option, I personally would advocate for that.
I would agree with Jenny on that one. I mean, there are some exceptions. Elm trees, Dutch elm disease, however many 100 years ago, whenever it was, decimated North American elm trees. And we found that Chinese elms, there's a few varieties that grow really well in Northeast Florida, do really well. Now, historically, we haven't done a great job of vetting foreign-grown trees that come into the country. Camphor trees, although a beautiful shade tree in Jacksonville, is an invasive. Rain trees, there's any number of trees and other plants that you have to vet and make sure they're not going to become an invasive exotic. Exotic's okay, invasive exotic is not good.
Okay, Lisa in Mandarin, or from Mandarin, asks, can you speak more about how the canopy assessment was done? Was it done by drone? Was it done by LiDAR, machine learning? These are technical questions, but how is the data collected on trees?
So for the Florida Forest Service study, it was collected using aerial imagery, which is taken from a plane, and that is much more detailed than satellite imagery. When you think of satellite imagery, you think of Google Maps or whatever, and you think, well, that's being updated all the time, but it's really not detailed enough for urban forestry. So the statewide plan was done with airplanes using aerial imagery. That is a lot more expensive, and that's why it's not updated constantly.
Joe from the south side asks, how long does it take a medium or tall canopy tree to mature after being planted?
It depends. Can you hear me? So live oaks are slow growers. I mean, it might, for a nice majestic live oak, it might take 30, 40, 50 years to really get big. Species like sycamore grow really quick. Red maples go really quick. So it really depends. They all have growth rates. I can't remember if the Tree Commission's planting list has the growth rate listed on it or not, but a lot of the times when you find these tables with all the different attributes of the trees, they will tell you whether it's a slow, medium, or fast growth rate. So short answer is it depends.
Sheila asks, why do new housing developments cut all the trees down when starting? Well, we don't have a developer on our panel to answer that question, but...
Well, I guess I'm a landscape architect, so it's a variety of reasons. Number one, it's economical, right? They want to make sure that they get as much yield in terms of square footage to sell as they can. They have to put roads in. They have to put sidewalks in. They have to put water lines, sewer lines, electrical lines, communication lines, drainage swales, retention ponds. And so you get to see how you get squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until, number one, it's not economically currently beneficial for them to save a big tree, but then the spots to plant the new trees are pretty limited as well.
This question says, I was told there is plenty of money. This is a tree commission question, I think. I was told there is plenty of money for planting trees, but that same money cannot be used for continued maintenance of the trees. Is that true?
We don't have Shannon here. There have been some recent interpretations in terms of what the tree fund money can be used for. I want to say that we've interpreted that we can indeed use it for maintenance. We are using it, I mentioned having staff that are going to be dedicated to getting tree funds allocated. That is tree fund money. We are using it even for ancillary facilities in urban areas where maybe the soil is excessively compacted and we need to dig out all of the dirt in the planting pit and replace it, and other strategies that we've got. So we are beginning to branch out and say, for a tree to be successful, you need to do all of these things as well.
And I think some of the tree fund money does go into maintenance. I think, and I'm looking for the city person way in the back, that Justin, doesn't 25% of the mitigation money go into maintenance at Public Works?
Yes, it's dependent on Public Works budget. So for example, if Public Works has $1 million budget for tree work, they can have an additional $250,000 towards maintenance out of the tree fund.
Okay, so tree fund money can be used for maintenance as well. Another question related to that from Tim in Little Pottsburg Creek. If development is the #1 cause for tree loss, why is the City Council considering a bill that reduces the amount developers would contribute to the tree fund, making it easier to remove trees without funding their replacement? What can be done to stop this? Anybody familiar with that?
There was a bill that passed, and there was many different versions of it, and a lot of people got involved in it, that was going to lessen the amount per inch for the tree mitigation fund. It was going to further change the zoning code a little bit on the trees. What was originally proposed versus what actually passed, it was much more palatable than what was originally proposed. And then there's a current bill out there that originally, at least I know you've been involved in this one a little bit more than I have, originally it eased the restrictions on like commercial properties. Think Amazon fulfillment centers where you've got a big truck court in the back and you can't put the trees like you normally would in a parking lot. So the current zoning code says, well, you still have to put that many trees there. You can just push them to the edge so the semis can maneuver around. That's a very basic example, but this one was trying to, I think, further dilute that and make it a little less intensive on the developer to have to provide those trees. That one is still working its way through. I don't know the exact bill number. It's for something, but contact your council member.
It's currently been deferred, and so we'll see in the next couple of weeks what happens with that. But bigger picture, for the longest time, we really didn't see changes to the legislation coming through. And then we've seen these two bills recently. In the ordinance that established the Tree Commission, of their 5 purposes established by the ordinance, one of the purposes of the Tree Commission is to review legislation and make recommendations to City Council. And I think just with possibly general turnover over the years and the fact that a lot of legislation hasn't come through, I think that maybe had been forgotten that they're supposed to do that. They're supposed to come and vet those bills at the Tree Commission. And so I did make a public comment today at the Tree Commission and provided them with a copy of the ordinance as a reminder that they need to be bringing that through Tree Commission, because first of all, you have all these industry experts on the Tree Commission, but then also that is a great way to funnel public comment into one area to vet these bills.
Okay, Martin from Hodges area asks, I recently learned of the Green Cities Accord in Minneapolis that is selling registered carbon offset credits for their tree planting to sustain their funding. Are there any creative funding mechanisms like that here? And if not, what are the barriers?
That's a very good question, and it's one that we're going to be workshopping very soon as part of our urban forestry management plan, looking for innovative funding solutions. So I would say if anyone knows of those and wants to bring those to me, I am all ears. I know we're constantly searching for grant funding in the Office of Resilience. We've been very successful in bringing in grant funding, and we're always going after additional monies. But that's only one way to get the funding, and we need, even though we've got a very healthy tree commission budget, as we said earlier, that goes to public properties, and there's plenty of potential planting areas that are on private land that we could then supplement if we had additional funding.
And when you're talking about incentivizing developers, for example, to leave more trees or any other policy things that you might be batting around right now in the resilience office, can you give us any more examples of what those have looked like in other places that you're looking at as inspiration?
Currently, that's not something that I've been working on, but it's something that we've tasked our consultant with. And so hopefully that'll come out in the wash over the next few months as we continue to develop the urban forest management plan.
All right. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to end with this one. William in Springfield says, why do we have so many darn crepe myrtles in Jacksonville? More variety, please.
Thank you, William in Springfield. Actually, several years ago, crepe myrtles did represent a pretty large part of our canopy. They're planted because they're popular. They are wildly popular with the public, and they are really hardy trees. When every other tree in a tree planting is suffering from heat, the crepe myrtles are doing just fine. And so they're just good, hardy trees, but they don't provide a lot of ecosystem benefits. I am happy to say that over the last, 4 or 5 years, the percentage of crepe myrtles as a part of our canopy has declined. Used to be pretty high. Now it's like 5%, 5 or 6%. Were we looking at today?
Yeah, it's funny. 7%, Nicole's saying. Yeah, we're looking with Justin on that tool, that online tool today, and he pulled up all of the trees that have been planted since 2017 that have been tracked on that online tool, and third or fourth on the list was crepe myrtle, and I said, well, wait a minute, why don't you just make it the last year, the last 2 years, and it did fall way down, which is good. That we're getting advocates and others pushing for more canopy trees and less flowery trees. But I will say that crepe myrtle, it's a weed. It's hard to get rid of. I've cut them down before and they've come right back. So there's a reason they're all over the place. They're easy to grow.
All right. I will end with letting each of our panelists answer the same question, which many of you have asked, which is, what can citizens do? What do you want the people here tonight to know about what they can personally do to stop the loss of trees and encourage the tree cover to recover?
So I guess that I would say from Greenscape's perspective, the majority of the land in Northeast Florida is in private hands. And so if the city did absolutely everything, absolutely perfectly, it would not be enough to save the tree canopy because the majority of the land is in private hands. So what you can do is take care of the trees on your property. Learn how to take care of the trees on your property. You can add trees. You can come to our great tree giveaway that we do every January, where we give away free trees, and you can replant, or you can encourage your neighbors to come. Also, this urban forest plan, we are really eagerly anticipating, and you can stay informed about that. Sign up for our newsletter. We will be updating you as it develops. And so thank you for your interest, and thank you for coming, and we're delighted to get this conversation started with you.
Yeah, I would say from a macro perspective, be involved. Y'all are here today. You clearly care about the canopy. Come to a tree commission meeting. You can dial in remotely. There's a Zoom link, and we talk about some of these issues there. And if these issues pique your interest, contact your council member. Also, those 2 programs I talked about, 630 City and Remove and Replace. If you've got area in front of your yard that's publicly owned right of way, All you need to do is ask, and someone will come out and see if we can plant a tree there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo what you guys have said, and take ownership of your own property, speak to your neighbors about their trees, the health of their trees, planting more trees if it's feasible. A lot of folks are hesitant to plant trees. They're scared of the risk that is involved with trees, but if you put the right tree in the right place and maintain it properly, it can actually buffer your property against wind damage. And so I think that getting educated and helping spread the word about the benefits of trees and what can be done to minimize the risk, I think is really critical. And then advocating for trees in your neighborhood within the right-of-way or potentially within properties. If you have an idea of a place you'd like to see trees, reaching out to the city and letting them know. We're hopefully going to be having more staff to work on those plans, but they need ideas. And so having community support for tree plantings is always something that they're looking for.
I was also asked to mention that the city's landscape architect from the Planning and Permitting Department, Jeff Lukowski, is here tonight to answer specific questions that you might have afterward about the legality of tree removal, permitting, etc. And that is our program. Thank you so much to our panel.